We are live.
Hello. No, he's gonna get, everybody's getting like a violation. It's like, it's a money grab. It's like, it's a kill.
All right, Mr. Chair, we are ready to go.
Okay. Welcome to the City of Lake Worth Beach Planning and Zoning Board meeting, City Hall Commission Chamber, Wednesday, August 7th, 2024 at 6 p.m. Okay, so should we have a roll call, please?
Sure. Mark Hum,
Here.
Juan Cotton,
Here.
Zaid Chomsky Basha,
Here.
Dan Waleski,
Here.
Evelyn Arcudio, Dave Matthews,
Here.
Henry Polsky.
Here.
You have a forum.
Okay. So I'd like to stand up for Pledge Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right. Do we have any additions, deletions?
No, Mr.
No.
Chair.
And any reordering, says recording, okay. Reordering and approval of the minutes. We're all good? Oh, our lovely legal counsel has come to join us. All right, would the approval of the minutes, July 17th, 2024, regular meeting minutes?
Motion to approve.
Second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Those meeting minutes are approved. Okay, the case is swearing in of the staff and the applicants. If you're here for a case, you should be sworn in to give testimony.
If you plan to give testimony this evening, please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear and affirm the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, say yes. Thank you.
All right. We have the proof of publication. Yeah. Yes,
we do.
okay, I'm just asking, just double sure. The withdrawals and postponements, anything?
No.
Everybody's here, good for that. Consent, what have you guys been up to? All good?
Consent items.
No consent items, all right. Public hearings, so for the board disclosure, if you've spoken to anybody about any of this, now is the time to let us know. Anybody? No? Okay, thank you very much. Unfinished business. Sir, we always have unfinished business, but not today. Okay, great. New business. Here we go. PZB project number 24-015-00006. Consideration of variance to allow the placement of a standby generator between a principal structure and the right-of-way at 1724 North Lakeside Drive. The subject is zoned single-family, residential SFR, and has a future land use designation of single-family residential SFR. It will be the same. So, staff, would you like to enlighten us a little bit on what is going on?
Yes, my name is Karina Campos. I'm the Senior Community Planner for the Department of Community Sustainability. I will be presenting this project. This is, as you said, PZB project number 24-015-00006 for the consideration of a variance to allow the placement of a standby generator between the principal structure and the right-of-way. This is the general map location. It is east of North Lakeside Drive and south of 18th Avenue North, and it is a single-family residential property. Here's a background. In 2021, the site received or applied for a permit for an addition to the home and for interior renovations and AC condenser replacement. That is currently in progress right now. The construction is in progress. And then in 2024, there's a permit for the demolition and reconstruction of an in-ground pool with paver decking. That permit is in review. So this is a proposal. It's for a standby generator between the principal structure and the right of way. The installation of a standby generator in the front yard is not permitted per section 23.4-17, which identifies the only locations where generators are permitted, which includes the side and rear setbacks. Here's a partial site plan that was provided that indicates where they are proposing this generator. It is the front yard, which is the west side of the property. And here's a photo that was provided that shows the general area. And as I mentioned, the house is under construction right now. So the zoning analysis, the land development regulations require all variance requests to be analyzed for consistency with section 23.2-26B. Let's see. So starting at criterion 1, the staff analysis indicates that the generator may be placed in the southeast area of the property rather than the front yard or the west side. The proposed generator will be 48 inches long, 25 inches wide, and 29 inches tall. Based on the building official analysis, the standby generator shall be elevated 1 foot above the pending base flood elevation of 9 feet. This would require the standby generator to be elevated approximately 4 feet from the ground and would therefore cause this generator to be approximately 6.5 feet tall with the generator and the concrete pad. A generator at this height in front of the existing house will likely be visible from the right of way. So if the board were to approve this placement of the generator in the front yard, staff has drafted conditions to visually screen the standby generator. The building official has also stated that the standby generator must be set back at least 5 feet from operable windows and doors, must have an 18-inch clearance from existing walls, and have a minimum setback of 3 feet from fencing and landscaping. There's a portion of the southeast corner of the existing structure area that is set back approximately 15 feet from the south side property line, which would allow the placement of the standby generator to be out of the side setback and far enough from operable windows and the existing wall. So therefore, staff contends that there are no special circumstances that are particular to the land that will not allow the standby generator to be placed at the southeast area of the property rather than the front yard. Therefore, the variance request does not meet the intent of criterion 1. So for criteria 2 and 3, the staff analysis includes that the strict applications of the LDRs would not deprive the applicant's continued use of the single-family residence and is not the minimum variance request, which makes possible use of the land as the southeast area of the property appears to be a suitable location and therefore does not meet criteria 2 and 3. So for criterion 4, the proposed location of the standby generator in the front yard would provide the greatest distance from the adjacent neighboring homes. However, the placement of the standby generator in the front yard will most likely be visible from the right of way. Conversely, placement of the generator to the southeast of the house will have less visual impact, but may have increased auditory impact to the neighboring house to the south. So if the board approves or moves to approve the variance, staff have drafted conditions requiring that the proposed generator be visually screened from the public right-of-way and that the generator's noise shall not exceed 65 decibels as measured from the property line. So as conditioned, the granting of the variance shall not be unduly injurious to contiguous properties, nor shall it be detrimental to the public welfare. Staff analysis indicates it does meet this criterion. So this is a photo of the location where staff is saying the generator can go. So in conclusion, the variance request meets one of the 4 variance criterias. staff indicates that there are no special circumstances peculiar to the land found. Strict application of the LDRs would not deprive the property owner of reasonable use of land. The standby generator may be placed in an alternative area, which would be the southeast area of the property. But the standby generator will not be detrimental to the public welfare as conditioned. So therefore, staff is recommending that the Planning and Zoning Board not approve the proposed variance as it does not meet all 4 of the variance criteria. If the Planning and Zoning Board moves to approve the variance request, staff have drafted conditions of approval, including requiring visual screening and noise limitations for the standby generator. But be advised that the approval of the standby generator in the front yard between the principal structure and the right-of-way may set precedent for future requests and or may influence future code changes to the standby generator section. So here's the motion. These are the conditions of approval, and I will leave it on the full site plan. And the applicant is here too, if you have any questions.
Would you like the applicant to speak?
Yeah, that would be interesting. Hello. Please state your name and your address. Thank you. Okay.
Okay. So let's just say here, but on the south side of the house, I don't know if you can see it from here, but putting the generator there would be very, very tight, and because of the height of it, it would be almost impossible to get to, and electrical disconnects, and it's just a very tight area. To put it in the front of the house, we're proposing that it goes behind this area, and you would not even see it at all, as this area is 6.5 feet above to flood level, so we only have to bring in like a foot or something.
Okay.
Half. But putting it on that southeast corner, it would be very difficult to get
put it
there.
in.
It's very, very tight.
Okay.
And I have a chart
Mhm.
on each side if you wanted me to read that. With
No.
Do you have a justification statement? It's not in the report.
Do you want me to read this?
No.
Is that the application request? Is that what he wants me to read?
In the digital backup, there was a justification statement that listed, presumably from the applicant, either the construction company or the property owner. It listed, it was like a page and a half.
Yeah, I've got it here.
Yeah, so I just didn't have it. So if it was online, but it's not here. So I was asking if you had it.
Sure.
Okay.
Do you want me to read it?
I'm not asking that you read it.
Oh, okay.
I was asking if you had it
I
handy.
do have it.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
Go ahead.
I said, it doesn't seem like the applicant really had a presentation to do, so I think if we have questions, we should, or
Well, I
did
do.
you?
I just don't know. I said, did you want me to read it or?
I don't think any presentation you want to, so typically you would give whatever presentation you wanted to tell us, and then we would ask you questions.
Okay.
But I don't want to interrupt you and start asking questions if you've got more to kind
Okay,
of present to us.
so,
Give you your time and then.
so the application request, the following request by Giuseppe Valdetta. of Florida Coast Construction is on behalf of the property owner, Kenneth and Barbara Campbell, is for the purpose of seeking a variance, special circumstances or conditions, the existing terrain of the property, the footprint of the existing structure, adjacent properties, and the location of existing equipment do not allow for the installation of a permanent standby generator at any other location on the property except in front of the principal structure. One other location on the property had been taken into consideration. At the southeast end of the existing structure, there is a greater distance from the existing property line. However, this location will not allow for the proper installation of a permanent standby generator due to proximity to existing openings, combustible equipment, and to a combustible fence and vegetation between the residence and the adjacent property to the south. In addition, the one other location would also make it difficult for first responders to deal with an emergency involving a permanently standby generator in accordance with NFPA 37. NFPA 37 is the National Fire Protection Association standard for the installation and use of stationary combustion engines. Its requirements limit the spacing of a generator from a structure or wall and require a generator to be located where it is readily accessible for maintenance, repair, and first responders. The existing terrain at the rear of the property is approximately 24 inches below the base flood elevation. Therefore, to install a permanently standby generator anywhere in the rear of the property, including the side setbacks, would require a platform greater than 24 inches in height. This, along with the generator itself, which measures 29 inches in height, would cause a violation of ordinance number 2014-02, 17, section 23-417, may be located inside setbacks with a maximum height of 30 inches, including the concrete pad. Other side setbacks on the property are too narrow and will not allow for proper clearance from property lines and existing structures. Ordinance number 2014-02 in section 23-417A, a standby generator located in a side or rear setback requires a minimum 3-foot separation from the property line. The rear of the property is located on the intercoastal waterway at an elevation below the base flood elevation. There is currently under construction an in-ground swimming pool and pool patio deck directly behind the existing dwelling. This would cause the permanent standby generator to be placed into the setback beyond the pool. This would create a condition that would make the permanent standby generator far more susceptible to damage during a storm, in addition to potentially creating a water and sound polluting condition, not to mention how difficult it would be to access for first responders as per NFPA 37. In addition, placing the permanent standby generator in the rear of the property would cause a reduction in value to not only the property in which the generator would be located, but any adjacent property. Also, to install the permanent standby generator at any other location on the property would cause a significant increase in the cost due to the location of the existing electrical meter and disconnect as to its distance from any other possible location, as well as obstructions and obstacles that would hinder the installation of the necessary conduit from the generator to the existing electrical meter. 2, the strict application of the provision of these LDRs would deprive the applicant of any reasonable use of the land or building for which the variance is sought. Due to the fact that there are no other reasonable locations on the property to place a permanent standby generator, the strict application of the provision of these LDRs would deprive the owner of reasonable use of the property. A permanent standby generator is essential in South Florida in order to provide for the health, safety, and well-being for any residents who are of Medicare age, which the current residents are, in addition to the security and comfort that a permanent standby generator would provide. Number 3, that the variance proposed is the minimum variance which makes possible the reasonable use of the land or building. And number 4, that the granting of the variance will be in accordance with the spirit and purpose of this chapter, will not be unduly injurious to contiguous property or the surrounding neighborhood, nor otherwise detrimental to the public welfare. In deciding appeals from decisions of the development review official or in granting variances, the decision-making board is authorized and required to impose any reasonable conditions and safeguards it deems to be necessary. The proposed location where the permanent standby generator would be placed will provide the owner with the minimum variance necessary. The owner will provide any necessary fence, wall, or vegetative screening to protect any adjacent property surrounding neighbor and passerbys from undesirable views, lighting, noise, odors, or other adverse effects. In addition, the proposed location would place the generator approximately 100 linear feet from the house directly adjoining the property closest to the proposed location and more than 50 lineal feet from the closest edge of the street. Therefore, the granting of the variance will be in accordance with the spirit and purpose of this chapter. It will not be unduly injurious to contiguous property or the surrounding neighborhood, nor otherwise detrimental to the public welfare. However, causing the generator to be placed at any other location than what has been proposed may not be in accordance with the intention, spirit, and purpose of this chapter, because any other location would be unduly injurious to contiguous property, the surrounding neighborhood, and potentially detrimental to the public welfare. Based on the above justification attachment information, the applicant respectfully requests approval of this variance. Thank you for your consideration.
Staff, do you have a few comments on that? On anything on the presentation? Have you guys looked into the NFPA assessment and the fire? Have you spoken to the fire department at all?
This is routed to fire review.
Mhm.
They didn't have any comments.
Okay.
And we looked at the strip. We do review the.
For
strip
your position
application.
or that position?
That position.
Okay,
We look at this through the LDRs.
I got it.
So
Yeah. Because she's arguing some other issues that NFPA takes a lot of precedence on things. But one of the things that is in there that you mentioned about it being 30 inches, no higher than 30 inches, it is correct. But the problem is it's from above the base flood elevation. So you actually start at 24 above.
Mhm.
So what you're telling us is not really correct in terms of what is coming back. So it would be 30 inches from above base flood, because you would have to get your pool also above base flood as well. There'll be a whole datum that'll be set up behind that is going to come up. So that it really is not going to stick up more than it should. Just so you know that. Technically.
In the front?
In the back. In the back. I talked about the pool. Pool's in the back, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, you can't have fish swimming in there, right?
No.
No, you don't want that. So it's going to have to come up, and the base flood will have to come up for a lot of that whole area, especially the walkable area around your pool.
But the argument is also that we can't get the electrical.
You can. I think it's more expensive, and it is.
More expensive.
Exactly. A lot more expensive. You can't that's not right either,
Well,
because, yeah.
Anything can be done, I guess,
Yeah.
but
Well, I'm not.
what's the most?
Right. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that
the best?
it's hard because you're telling us some things that actually there's a couple of holes in it, and I just want to let you know what those holes were. Okay. So I do this for a living. So, yeah. Anyway, anybody else?
Yeah, I have a couple questions regarding elevation as well, because it sounds like I'm hearing something different and I just want to clarify. So on your property right now, the natural elevation of your property, the front yard is higher than the backyard.
Yes.
Okay, you got the same base elevation throughout, because it seems like staff are saying that in the front of the house assembled together, you'd be at 6 feet tall, but in the back of the house, you'd be lower. But it sounds like the reality is the opposite. And I just want to make sure if staff agrees with that, because it sounds like that's just a mistake in math. And I want to clarify, if you're talking about having a 1 foot pad in the front plus the 30 inches of the equipment. So your equipment, if it was in the front yard and had to be screened, would be, under 4 feet, not over 6.5 feet. Correct. Is staff in agreement, or is there something missing from this that supports the math?
The 30-inch height is only applicable if it's in the setback, a side or rear setback. So the height really isn't an issue on the side property line because it'll be out of the side setback. If it goes in the proposed location or in the staff suggested location. In the front, I believe the base flood elevation is around 4. And
It's-
then
It's at 6.4, I think it is.
Is there, so, but I
and
guess
it'll
what,
be changed. The FEMA maps are changing or going to be in effect in December, so it'll make it 9. So that's where we're getting the,
I'm sorry, what I want to clarify is you gave a height and said if it's in the back of the house, it's going to be this tall. If it's in the front of the house, it's going to be taller. And from what I'm hearing from the applicant is in the front of the house, the natural grade is taller and that the unit would only be 4.5 feet tall with the 1 foot pad that's required.
the analysis doesn't include the height issue in the side or the rear. Because it'll be out of the setback. So we didn't provide an analysis for that portion, only the front, because it'll be visible.
But I'm so because the math that I'm hearing doesn't get me to 6.5 feet for a generator height in the front yard. And I'm trying to understand how you got to that.
Based on the pending map of the 9-foot base flood elevation, that concrete pad would be about 4 feet tall. And then on top of with the generator of 29 inches, it'll be about 6.5 feet tall altogether. That's with the concrete pad and with the standby generator.
So flood elevations are always going to be contentious stuff, especially when we're talking about pending flood elevations that are not in effect and are not legally enforceable code at the moment, right? So they're doing an addition on their home, and presumably you're telling them that their generator has to be taller than the house that you're allowing them to build currently, which doesn't really make sense to me. If they were able to apply for a permit between now and December, and they already are doing an addition at one elevation, why would they not be able to? Why would you require them to raise their generator to an elevation that's not currently in effect as code?
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
elevation isn't confirmed in this analysis, so I'm not sure where.
I guess in terms of granting a variance or in terms of understanding the impact of having the generator in the front yard, the height of the generator is an important characteristic of it. And staff has done math and told us that's going to be 6.5 feet tall. The applicant is saying it's going to be more like less than 4 feet tall. That's a pretty big difference, and I'm trying to decide which one is accurate.
So
And it sounds like 4 feet is accurate.
current map, FEMA maps of the 6 feet for the base flood elevation, and then it would be about, I think the front elevation is like 4. So the existing elevation. And then adding the 2 feet plus the 2.5 feet. So it'd be about 4.5 using the current FEMA map.
Can I just say, the current elevation where we're gonna put the proposed generator is 6.24, I believe, 6.24, 6.
Yeah, Because I know on those lots, they
It's
start
sort
up
of
high
in
and
that
they
area.
grade off towards the water. So
6.24, I think it is.
So essentially, under today's flood elevation, you would have a normal size pad and the
Yes,
generator on grade
compliant.
with that. Okay, I don't really have any other questions. I do have a couple of questions for staff, but I'm gonna, if anyone has any questions for the applicant, they want to go ahead.
Hi, well, I think you said things that made sense to me as far as the elevation and the height and so forth, but I have my little ruler out. I'm not that good at it. When I was at home and looking at the south side, and actually in your section 24-4-17, it says that a standby generator located on the side or rear setback only requires a minimum of 3-foot separation from the property line. And from what I could see, that you would have a lot more room once that generator was there, where you could still not have a problem with fire or any other situation. Anyway, maybe my figures are wrong, but that's the way I got it on the map. It was more of a statement than a question.
So currently, our generators are allowed in the front yard
No.
per the LDRs, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So, okay, so for getting into that, I have some questions, because I've had, over the years here, I've had mixed interpretations, especially when it comes to the definition of setbacks within the city, right? So within this, it's specifically saying setbacks, and it's calling out setbacks, and it sounds to me that the language within the code is a granting more area to put a generator than would normally be there. So normally you can't have like AC units in the side setback. That's just usually a requirement, is your AC units can't be in a side setback. They can't be, but this is saying a generator can be in the side setback as long as it's within 3 feet of it. So like as an example, their AC equipment, I believe on the house, it shows is in the front of the house. So the AC equipment is already in the front of the house. But it's not, quote, in the front setback, because the front setback, I believe the city defines as the first 25 feet of the lot, right? And the side setback is typically defined as the required side setback, not the actual side setback, right? So that's where things kind of get weird, is I don't know when on a typical blueprint, you're going to have required setbacks and provided setbacks. But within the code, I've had issues before when I've talked setbacks where the city says, no, the setback is our required setback, not like, for instance, this says that you can't have the same LDR language says that you can put it in the rear of the rear setback as long as it's not on an alley, right? So if you have an alley, you can't put it in the rear setback. So that would be the interpretation of the code that I'm hearing. Okay, so if I have a house in Lake Worth and my house is built to the side setbacks, as most of them are, you're saying you can't put a generator in the front yard and you can't put it anywhere in the backyard either, because the backyard is your rear setback. So you can't have a generator. That feels like a more strict interpretation of setback. So saying that, so to me, it's like you have your lot, you have your perimeter of your rear and your front setbacks, and inside of that is your buildable area of the lot. This is saying you can go outside of that and put it in the rear or the side setbacks, subject to other requirements. Where they're proposing it is not in a setback at all. And while I see that there are provisions within the code that provide allowances for putting it in a setback, I don't see where it says you can't put it in the buildable area of the lot. So I would assume that that's in addition. Does that make sense? And that's me reading the code and reading your analysis of the code. It doesn't seem like that's an exclusion. And in this case, the house is set back way beyond the setback, right? So we've had instances where people have had houses set way back from the setback and they want to put a swimming pool, and we've allowed them to put the swimming pool in the front yard because we've said they just don't have room where people would normally put it. And this is not, again, not in a setback at all where they're proposing to put it. It's inside of the buildable area of their property.
But it's in the front yard. So that's,
Front yard as defined by,
well, it'd be defined by the LDRs, which is
so if they put
not a setback.
So if they put a small shed there to hide their trash bags, to hide their trash cans, the front yard becomes the edge of that to the front, and now it's in an intermediate yard between the structure and the house. Do you see what I'm saying? Like you're using the term setback, or you're using the term front yard and saying you can't put it in front yard. Can you put it in a rear yard? Because the code doesn't say you can put it in a rear yard. Right? It says you can put it in a rear setback if it doesn't have an alley. That's all the code says.
I think that's just intended to say that it can be in a setback, but it can be in the rear yard.
Then it could be in the front yard. As
But
long as it's not, but it
The
can never
LDR
be in
says
the
it
front
can't be in the
setback.
front yard.
Does it? Because I don't see that in the code, and I don't see that in the section of the code that you guys referenced.
So based on my interpretation of the code, we have an inclusionary zoning where it doesn't specifically say it's allowed in the front yard. It's not allowed in the front yard.
So then by your definition, it's also not allowed in the rear yard.
Well, structures are allowed in the rear yard and the side yard. So
and structures define the front yard. Like, that's the thing that doesn't, I understand where you're going, but we have, and I've had this issue before with completely other things, but where it's been said, the definition of what setback is. Because literally, if she put a structure somewhere in between the existing house and the road, the front setback, that's no longer her front yard. The definition of front yard has now changed, and now she can put the generator there. And to me, that seems like a very arbitrary, like, to me, the code as I'm reading it, it's basically saying you have your buildable area of the lot, which you can build a generator in, and you can also build it into the setbacks, which normally you can never build into as long as it meets these criteria. So you can have a 5-foot side setback. This says you're allowed to build in your side setback as long as it's 3 feet from the property line. It says you can go into the rear setback as long as it's only 3 feet away from it, as long as there's not an alley, so you're up against the property. So to me, it's you're starting with an area and you're giving additional area to build the generator. I don't see where it's excluded any area not mentioned. Because, yeah, like I'm saying, I've got a lot on a 50-foot lot in Lake Worth, I've got a 5-foot setback on both sides. If I can't and I have an alley. So if I can't put it in my rear yard and I can't put it in my front yard, this code, as you're interpreting it, means you cannot have generators on most homes in Lake Worth.
I see what you're saying. We're talking about 23.4-17.
Yes, they've got it up now on
Yeah.
the screen.
Yeah. I mean, I assuming what's in this table is the full text of the ordinance, which I'm not sure of that, but if this is the full text of the ordinance, I mean, what staff is saying as to their interpretation, if it's not specifically authorized, it's excluded. To me, that's reasonable. That's what the whole code is. That's the lens through which the whole code is read. So I mean, I think that there's a general prohibition for generators in the front yard, and that's reflected in practice, and that's what this basically says under what she's saying.
So reading this language here, does this allow, if you're on an alley, can you put a generator in your backyard?
Well, that's not the situation.
I understand, but
here.
that's the interpretation of the code. The interpretation that's being, and we're here to interpret code, and the interpretation that's being given to us.
So you're proposing that hypothetical for the proposition that their interpretation is an unreasonable interpretation.
Yes.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
And I've encountered this with other issues before.
Yeah.
So specifically here, when it talks about the rear yard, many of our homes have alleyways. And so this says that you can put it in the rear setback if it's not located on an alleyway.
Yeah.
But if you're located in an alleyway, that no longer applies. And this does not specifically allow the placement in a rear yard.
It's not a well drafted. I mean, is this the whole section? Is this literally what it says? Like the second prong, it has that qualifier if the property is not located on the alley. Is that in the code? So I'm looking at point number 2, and then the second half of that sentence is like a strange qualifier on that point. Is that because that's what he's saying? I mean, that's the whole thing, is the staff's interpretation is unreasonable.
Yeah. The second sentence, the installation of a standby generator in the front yard is not permitted per section 23.4-17,
But that's her
Where is it?
text. That's just her analysis. It
Right,
doesn't say that in the
exactly,
code.
right,
Exactly.
right.
So I'm like, what does the code actually say?
Yeah.
And it's just this, we have
in
this,
practice, front yard generators are not usually around, right? Because of noise and people driving by and all those type of things. But I guess he has a point in the sense that it's not really very clear in the actual, something in the LDR should say that if it's going to be interpreted that way.
Yeah, and if you have a house that was built before, and we've had instances like, like the pool is an example, but for general stuff, you've got a house that's built far back. Nowadays, the city kind of, as you're applying for plans, they treat the setback more of a build-to line within the city. So if you're building and you want to and if you went to the city and said, I want to set I've got a 130-foot lot, I'm going to put my house on the back 50 feet. I'm going to have 80 feet from my house to the front yard. The city's going to be like, well, no, pull your house forward. But they used to do that. There are some homes in our community that are super far back. And we've said, well, wait a minute, they've got nothing on their entire property except for front yard. And so that's where the city has said, well, when we talk about front yard, we're talking about the front setback. So this house is set far back. They're talking about putting a generator more than 25 feet off of the street,
Because of the
being
building.
completely surrounded by landscaping. And to me, reading the code, it seems to comply with the code because I'm not using a strict interpretation that would deny it to be in a backyard. And if we use the very strict interpretation, yeah, to me, you're basically, it's like any structure. You can build on your lot subject to the setbacks. And then this is actually making it a little bit easier, saying you're allowed to encroach into those setbacks by these dimensions. And in the rear, you can encroach, you could have a 15-foot setback in the rear, but it can be located as long as it's 3 feet away and you don't have an alley, you can move it into that setback. But to me, that's not,
I think at
That's
some
not
point or
saying that's the
another,
only
this
place you
LDR
can
needs
build
to be
it.
cleared up.
Hi, everybody.
hello.
So we've been doing a little bit more research, trying to get you a code section that you can reference. So in the single family zoning district, there is a provision that accessory buildings, pools, and similar structures shall be allowed within the rear or side yard of a double front or corner lot between the main structure and a public street, provided that the minimum setbacks are maintained. So typically, these types of accessory structures, pools, sheds, and standby generators, the things, not just accessory structures, but other things that are of similar ilk, are not permitted in the front yards between the road and the house, in the front yard or the setback. You all see variances and requests on occasion for pools to be set in the front yard because of the orientation of the house and the yard and other things like that. This is similar to that the variance is because they want to put it in the front yard instead of in the side yard or in the backyard. This code section that has been provided to you is really kind of in addition to that, if you're going to put it in the side yard or the backyard. But hey, by the way, it can also go in the setbacks in those areas because it is an emergency generator and we recognize that there are some special qualifications for that. So these in the setbacks are in addition to the side and backyards that it would also otherwise be allowed in.
I think everybody understands that. The biggest issue was they should have just quoted what you quoted up
Right.
front. And that would have been a lot easier because it would have given us a very clear indication that it's not allowed in the front yard.
But does it, so, okay, can you read that section again, though?
So that, and this may not be, we're scrolling here.
Yeah.
Or I'm scrolling here. So this says that the accessory buildings, pools, and similar structures shall be allowed within the rear or side yards. And this is for a double or front corner lot on when the main structure, between the main structure and the public street, because there are on those corner lots or double frontage lots, there's a change in which is the front yard or the side yard or the backyard, depending on, again, that orientation.
But this is not a corner lot or a double
Right.
frontage lot. Yeah.
Right. But this is just another example because
But does it say in the code? I mean, I see what she's saying about,
that specific.
does it say anywhere? Yeah, because that's my. Because,
so-
because
so-
if it doesn't, then I think Dan has a good argument that the current interpretation of staff is not a reasonable interpretation that could uniformly be applied across the city. And so therefore, I mean, I do want to point out, is an ambiguous ordinance reasonable or unreasonable as interpreted by staff is a question for the circuit court on appeal. That's not the question for us now. The question for us now is the variance prongs. But I mean, it's a good point that Dan brought up, I think.
And I'm, I know you're scrolling and we all kind of are. And I think that, but when I read this code reference, this specific code reference did not seem to be the conclusive kind of argument. So I've got, and I know I'm not sure exactly what the rules for this. So maybe legal, am I allowed, while we're up here, we've had this kind of conversation before, but I have my laptop open and I have municipal code. I know I'm not supposed to reference outside things during a hearing, but the code is the code, right? So I'm allowed, this is okay for me to read something out of the code at this point in the record? Okay, so a different section, actually this section right before the standby generator refers to mechanical systems and equipment. And so the question is, the previous one was accessory structures, pools, and similar accessory structures. I know recently we have approved a variance for a shed in a front yard where a house was all the way back and they needed some storage or garage, and we approved that to be in the front. So we've approved accessory structures in front yards in addition to pools. But this is for mechanical systems and mechanical equipment. So, you know, when you're talking about like an AC compressor or you're talking about a generator, to me, both in appliance noise level, functionality, those are more similar than a pool or a structure. So mechanical systems, equipment for existing residential structures. For existing residential structures, placement of mechanical equipment shall be allowed in the rear or side setbacks and or between the main structure and a public street if there's insufficient space to locate the equipment outside of the setbacks. So
What's that
within the
section?
code, that's section 23.4-16. Now, again, that's saying mechanical systems and equipment. So in one section, we're saying the language
Pools and
specific
other
for generator is unclear. The language for pools and accessory structures requires a variance for the front yard. But for mechanical systems and equipment on existing residential, as long as it's outside of the front setback, can be placed in the front yard without a variance. So-
I would say, I mean, we could.
That's
I guess everybody
persuasive.
Gets what it is, and I think it's been some really good points here. The staff, I'm inclined to table it, to get more information from the staff, because I see that there's a, you know, a juncture here, and I don't mean to like push back your stuff, but if you have a point, you should have a point, get it? And then, but the staff actually, I'd like to hear more from staff to see what a more concrete type of an argument might be. And if we have a problem with the LDRs, maybe that's something you may have to fix. Okay?
Absolutely. We'd appreciate the additional time to address the concerns.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, the only thing that would happen at this point would be we'd have to continue this to the next meeting. If that's okay
It's-
with you.
Are you on, is continuing it to the next meeting kind of a hardship for you? I know you got a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, a lot of stuff going on, for sure.
But-
I was hoping to get it resolved tonight,
Right.
of course.
But I think we've got a
A
lot
lot of-
going on here, and there's a lot of different opinions, and I think that somehow we'd like to be, because the problem is if we set a precedent with this, it becomes like something of a ripple effect that happens through. And not only that, but we want to be very clear what the code says, and that if you are granted that variance, it is within the realm of what the variances will have, and you should be scot-free if that's the story. Okay?
I would, if I'm okay with leaning in that direction. I mean, in general, we've approved some other variances, and I think now that we're talking about a 4-foot tall generator, 30 feet back off the property line, surrounded completely by shrubs, and knowing that there are other issues, I would be in favor of approving it as a variance and still asking staff to go forward and verify whether or not a variance was even required and come back to clean that up. But if the majority of the board is not in agreement with that, then I don't have a problem tabling it to give staff time to reevaluate. And the one thing that I would recommend to the applicant, if that is the direction that we go, is to talk specifically to the building official about the NEC access, because the, you know, fire department and things like that may not have reviewed it, but you could get an answer that, yes, you can put in the back. And then when you actually apply for a permit to put in the back, they could say, oh, you need to add a 3-foot sidewalk so that, you know, emergency responders can access to the back of it, or you need to have some access requirements that we're unaware of. So, and if they were to provide you a letter saying you can't put it at this location, that
You
would
might have a
support your
$10,000 sidewalk going back to it.
Yeah, but that would be supportive of an argument if, you know, saying that I have no other location that I can put it, if
Yeah.
they were to agree with you and say, yeah, we don't like it back there. And but how does the rest of the board feel in terms of?
Well, I have to feel that I thought it was pretty well said on a few things here until several opinions came about, and I feel that we don't want to hold you up, or I don't want to hold you up, but I think I need more clarification, and I feel it should be tabled.
Yeah, I'm fine tabling. I just want to go back to what the homeowner needs to do in order to find out these fire requirements. Wouldn't the building official do that during a review?
The building official would do it on review necessarily for permitting.
Yeah.
But they haven't reached permitting phase.
Planning and zoning.
So that's why, you know, going to them now and kind of saying, hey, you know, this is a location I'm being recommended. Do you have a problem with it? And if they say, no, I don't have a problem with it, well, you at least know you have a viable alternative. But if you are of the opinion right now that they would not allow that to be put back there because of access, and they agree with you and say, yeah, we couldn't get back there if we needed to, and case of an
See-
emergency, that would help your argument for a variance.
Yeah, then my question would be though, wouldn't the building officials wouldn't even look at that unless an actual permit came in, correct?
No, the building, you can always set up a meeting with building official and ask, it's just not going to be routed. If you just apply, it's not going to get routed through them.
No.
But if you were to meet with the building, asked to meet with the building official about this, they would certainly meet with you. And if they say yes, I
The other
wouldn't have a
thing,
problem permitting it.
the other thing that a lot of people are forgetting here is that if you do table it and you get concrete evidence that, hey, you can do this and it's part of what you need in the code and everything else, if somebody tries to walk this back at the building department or the fire department or something else, you could say, hey, look, we've looked at all these things and guess what? I can do this, right? So I would be that much more happy to do that because then you don't want somebody, I've seen things with the fire department, with the building department say, wait a minute, no. Take it somewhere else. And that could be a problem. So I'd rather not have.
That this was routed to the building official and I discussed it with him, who pulled up the installation guidelines for this project. Or for the specific generator that includes the fire information, which is
Mhm.
included in the.
Noise,
analysis.
fire, all the other
Right,
things.
and
yeah.
that's where I got that it needs to be at least 5 feet from the operable window, 18 inches from the wall, and then the 3 feet from landscaping or fencing, and I got the height from him too.
Mhm.
So he indicated that the southeast area was also a reasonable area to put in.
But the holistic thing, I think there's some holes in the argument and I think you need to clarify.
I just wanted to clear out.
Yeah,
that.
no, and that's good. It's good. You did that, but still, I'm seeing some, people are arguing, wanting more information.
So if we table this, we need to table it to a date certain, right? To avoid any additional publication requirements or anything like
Yeah,
that.
it should be easy. There shouldn't be any
hardship.
hardship on her in
Okay.
terms
Right.
of coming back with something.
So-
Please, that's not what we're here
Continue
for.
it and then.
So
the
I
next
will,
meeting,
I will
determine
move
date.
that we continue this to the very next meeting that we have as. per-
Please. Yeah. All in
Is-
favor? No.
Is there a second?
Second?
I'll second.
So September 4th.
September
Okay.
4th.
Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Okay. PZB project 24-005-00004. A blanket conditional use request for multiple uses provided in the LDR section 23.3-6 for LZC Holdings LLC, an existing industrial development at 714 Barnett Drive. The property zone is zoned industrial. The Park of Commerce I-POC and has an industrial future land use FLU designation. Okay, staff, would you have anything for your presentation?
Yeah, for the record, Scott Rodriguez with Planning and Zoning. As mentioned, this is a blanket conditional use request for a 714 Barnett Drive that's located in the Industrial Park of Commerce. This is a request that is gonna propose low, medium, and high intensity uses in the roughly 13,590 square foot use area. This is a pretty decent sized site. And it is located east of Barnett Road, north of 7th Avenue, and it's an existing warehouse. There exist two existing warehouse and industrial buildings. This discussion was born out of code compliance issues and the property owner's request for a zoning letter, which staff did provide. And I do believe that's in your overall packet. They were requesting zoning district information, the formation of it, and also some what uses would be allowed to go there in IPOC, Industrial Park of Commerce. And staff did provide that information. There are currently, the proposed uses are currently for new uses on the site. And here's the existing conditions. You can see the two buildings located there. I believe the bay range is 450 square feet to as much as 6,000 or 7,000 square feet. Thus, the wish list for high intensity uses that you see in the staff report. There are actually 4 uses currently on the site. 3 are existing non-conforming minor vehicular repair uses that do have active business license, and they will continue to be allowed to operate as long as there's no gap in that timing, or their business license expires. There's a 4th one, however, that does not have an active business license, but this proposal won't help that new use because of development standard requirements that that use won't meet. I have talked to the property owner. They will be addressing that tenant and addressing code issue related to that. I just want to give a little bit of background on existing uses. Again, this is a proposed request for new uses and really a wish list for high intensity uses.
Are there any code issues on this property? at the
Right
moment?
now, there's an open lien that is addressing minor code issues and as well as business license activity. And this is going to assist in that. The property owner will be going to magistrate hearing at the end of this month. And if the board approves this blanket, this will assist them in that in compliance, and staff will also go to the meeting to provide support and information based on tonight's meeting. So after our analysis, the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan, strategic plan, LDRs, conditional use requirements. And as I mentioned before, some additional development standards related to administrative and conditional uses that are highlighted here for vehicular service and repair facilities and manufacturing, processing, and fabrication facilities. And those are also identified in the staff report as conditions of approval. And therefore, staff is recommending approval with conditions. And I didn't identify, if you look at the staff report, I did not identify all the uses, but here they are identified as conditions of approval. We have some low intensity and some medium intensity. A lot of them actually, and some high intensity. And again, the high intensity would have to come from combination of the buildings and the use areas to exceed the 7,500 square foot. So really, we're looking at low to medium type uses. And the businesses that are located there now, I think, have had at least been active for 6 or 7 years and probably will continue. But they can continue to operate as they're legal non-conforming.
Okay.
And that concludes my presentation.
Just a couple of questions on the, could you clarify again, there's an open lien and how's that taken care of, and why the 4th business has operated so long without a business license, and what's happening with that? Again, I didn't quite understand how you take care of that.
Well, that's a code compliance related issue. I know that and speaking with the property owner, the tenant will be asked to leave. So that's going to take care of that.
Okay.
The reason they can't be there is because the supplemental, the development regulations, the additional development standards, they just can't meet. They're not going to meet at that site, specifically the parking regulations. So there's very strict parking requirements for minor vehicular repairs and major vehicular repairs. The actual lot area does meet minimum frontage requirements and lot size. But when you start getting into the parking issues, that kind of kicks that out. So the hope was that this proposal would help that 4th business out, and it won't. They won't be allowed to continue.
Thank you.
Okay. Any comments from the board?
The applicant is here if you have any additional questions.
We speak to the applicant. We've done these
Yeah,
before.
I don't think we need to hear from the applicant. I would,
We have a motion.
I can do it here. So I would, where am I here?
There you go.
Yeah, okay. So I would move to approve with conditions the request for PZB project number 24-005 00004 blanket conditional use permit based upon the competent substantial evidence provided in the staff report and in the testimony at the public hearing.
Have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Congratulations. All right, on to ordinance number 2024-11. Consideration of an ordinance amending chapter 23, land development regulations, article 4, development standards, section 23.4-25, micro units to provide minor changes to the development of standards of micro units. This was something that came up before, and William came in and spoke about it, and I'd like to see what the actual real changes are. And I had made some suggestions, and I don't know if some of those were taken in, but we can talk about it.
So
I'm gonna read the caption real quick.
Okay.
This is ordinance 2024-11, an ordinance of the city of Lake Worth Beach, Florida, amending chapter 23 land development regulations, article 4 development standards, section 23.4-25 micro units, and providing for severability, conflicts, codification, and an effective date.
So for the record, Scott Rodriguez, planning and zoning, and to your point, Juan, Mr. Chair, sorry. The recommendations that the board made on the previous LDR, we made those changes and city commission approved those. So those are reflecting here. These are a couple of new revisions. So on page 2, if you look at line 59, there is a reduction in the percentage of mixed uses and interior shared common area. We changed that to 15%. And also included an exception beginning on page, which is on page 2, beginning on line 103. And it's the same reasoning as before. We heard from private sector and interested parties, and they'd like to see some flexibility.
Yeah, there was an issue before with the shared common areas. That was a big, now it's 10% of gross.
And that was actually something, the part that's being changed from 15 to 20%, if I'm correct, that actually came from us, where we asked you to include that to eliminate the need to have mixed use. So that was one, so I appreciate that you guys took that, incorporated in. And I kind of do, at that time, I remember we talked about 20% as a board. We were kind of like, well, what do we do? And we were saying, well, it was 10% commercial use and 10% shared common use. So if they're going to get rid of the commercial, just have them add it all in. But that we even talked about that at the time, that 20% seemed pretty high. So I think that was already discussed. The exception, I have a little bit of concern over, because I know the original opposition to mixed units is that you basically are building substandard housing, that you're building really small units, you're not providing amenity, and that instead of it being comparable, like a different type of a solution for housing, it just becomes a smaller solution for housing. And that essentially you're just squeezing people into boxes, and it becomes, something that we didn't really want. And that's where the whole idea of providing public common space creates it as a slightly different living experience, and that made sense. But it sounds like, if I'm correct, this exception would say if you have an existing property in Lake Worth and you want to convert it, you can more or less convert it to those, hotel room sized apartments, and then you put all of your amenity space outside. And I know that with regards to affordable housing and with regards to some special populations, having a lot of amenity areas outside ends up being a nuisance for property owners around there. If you put a lot of people into a small building and there's nowhere for them to socialize inside of the building, so they're all outside socializing, it becomes more of a kind of a commercial use in a residential neighborhood. And that does potentially change the aspect of it a little bit. So where I understand the flexibility, there's always this kind of line between how far do you go towards the thing that we've said we don't want. And this is kind of a way to provide some flexibility to where people can be more creative in developing a property. But we are inching closer to that kind of just building, efficiency style units and then putting a big bunch of picnic tables outside where everybody hangs out and is loud till 2 o'clock in the morning, pissing off the neighbors, but they have nowhere else to go because they don't have a living room. They've just got a tiny unit. And now they're all forced to socialize outside. So the idea of the micro units, I believe, was that you were creating that indoor space so they had somewhere else to go and weren't all, outside creating a different character for the neighborhood.
I think
So
that the whole thing really is about, there was an absolute need and there's a big financial need as well. And I think the problem you're talking about would be more design based, because if the designers went in and responsibly took over and made a sort of, decent community space, garden space, that kind of area, instead of just throwing a few tables out front, right? Yes, it'd be a design issue to resolve. I mean, we deal with these things all the time and we tend to have good results with it, but it's a design problem. I mean, one of the things that's good here is they did a minimum of 10 micro units, because there's some
Right.
small lots that could actually use it,
Instead of 20.
and instead of 20, so you don't have this big ghetto of stuff. You have like 10 units that could be a little more amenable to getting, garden space and nice little sort of, rooftop space, all that kind of stuff. And I think it's a design issue. And if you do it right, it can work.
I absolutely agree. And I like the concept of it, but specifically, like I'm thinking you've got existing units, existing buildings.
Mhm.
And so we have areas where, like, let's say you're partitioning down a building. I'm not sure exactly how this would work for density. I'm assuming they wouldn't be grandfathered anything. So if they had an addition, if they had so micro units count as 0.75 units as opposed to 1 units when you calculate density. So if you had an existing property that was 4 units, but was not conforming to the current code, you couldn't apply density and change around walls and make that 6 units based on the new, it would still be whatever that land area was. Basically, if you're converting the inside, you would be subject to bring it into conformance with the code, right? You wouldn't be grandfathered any additional density in a property. I'm pretty sure the answer is yes to that, but I just want to make sure, absolutely sure that it is.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm sorry, I'm not.
In my mind, I have properties going through my head, and I'm thinking about, like, some of them. There are properties in our city that are large buildings on lots that might have 4 units or 5 units, 6 units, where that they would not be able to build that. They wouldn't have any incentive to convert to a micro unit because it would be, they would have to meet whatever the density is currently. But if somebody had a property that was currently allowed for 8 units, or they could then come in and say, I'm going to build 10 units here, because they would get that point. They could take an 8-unit condo and they could take out the interior walls and convert that into a 10-unit building, reducing the size of the units. And then if they didn't have enough interior space to build indoor amenities, they would build the amenities outdoors.
Yeah.
Is kind of the idea of this, right?
Yes.
And yeah, so to me, there is, and I agree with you, a lot of it is planning, a lot of it is how you do it,
Yeah.
but there are good designers and there are bad designers, and our code sets the rules for that. And so we've set the rule,
There's
and
a gray area and everything. You can't
There-
lock it up. Right?
there is, but so specifically, I'm thinking of buildings that are in close proximity to other residential, where you could have 10 people living in small units. Yeah, and I believe these go all the way down to 400 square feet. For a micro unit is between 350 and 750. We don't have the entire original ordinance. We just, I believe, have some of the changes to it here. Can you confirm for me what the square footage is of a micro unit?
Is it 400? Probably 400. Lost it.
I know it's a range. It's
Yeah, it is a range, and I think you're right. But I can't confirm that.
I thought it went really low. Like I thought it almost went down to, I want to say 350 square feet was the bottom. I know it's low. That's the point that I'm raising, and that I think we need to take a look at here. but it was 350 because you had to have this additional square feet.
I don't see it in here.
So, yeah, because I believe our standard code is 400 square feet for an efficiency. And then it's 650 for one bedroom. And I thought that a micro unit was smaller than efficiency, allowed down to 350 square
I don't
feet.
see it here.
Yeah.
It's not,
Oh.
here. Yeah. So it'd be interesting. I don't know if we could make a comment to say to add the minimum square footage. That would be a good, for us to pick up on that and kind of.
Yeah, and that was always the purpose of this, was to allow these kind of, so the concept behind this always was that you have these small units that are basically a hotel room, a bedroom, you could have a small kitchenette in there, kind of a thing, but they're really, you then provide this community space outside where people can congregate, can hang out together. And so the idea of, yes, it adds flexibility if you convert an existing building to eliminate the requirement for indoor community space, but also you change the character of and the idea of what you're designing.
The square footage is in the definition of micro unit. And the square footage is between 250 square feet and 750 square feet with a fully functioning kitchen and bathroom.
Yeah. So this effectively allows for existing hotels in certain areas to be turned into, permanent apartments where that 250 square feet is converted into a unit, and they don't now. The previous one was, okay, you can do that, but you have to add a community area for these people to,
Right. No, I remember that.
recreate.
I
But
just
now we're
don't see it
eliminating
here.
that requirement.
I don't see the square footage here of a minimum.
She said it's in the definition.
It's in the definition. Okay.
So I'm a little bit concerned about, I'm not a little, I need time to really wrap my head around, because and you have people, I'm assuming, this is to add flexibility. This is from feedback. So I'm assuming there are property owners who would like to convert units to micro units, but they don't want to have to build that interior community space. And so that's the whole thing here, is that do we really so what we said last time is, hey, you don't have to have the commercial component, but we're going to increase the requirement for you to have shared community. And now they're saying we're going to allow all that shared community space to be outside. So that's like we took a few steps, and now this is a pretty big jump. And I don't think that I'm comfortable with the logic behind it and how it could impact some of our neighborhoods without a better understanding.
Share common areas up equate to 10% of the gross living area.
Yeah, but then under the exception,
Yeah.
it's saying that if you're using an existing building,
Yeah.
you can combine the interior and the interior and exterior, which you're required 5% exterior, 10% interior. And if you're not doing commercial, it's actually 15. So you're talking about 20% of the square footage, 5% outside, 15% inside. And this says for existing structures being converted, the total of those areas can be combined. And combined shared common area and outdoor amenity may be combined to be at least 20%. So it's saying you can have 0% inside and 20% outside.
Cool.
Right? Am I understanding that correct?
I agree.
Would you like to propose that there be a certain minimum percentage of interior?
I mean, I don't think that we should go below the 10% that was part of the original. Originally we said 10% interior. So the original code was 10% interior, 10% outside, or 10% mixed use, 10% interior, 5% outside. We changed it previously to be, if you don't have 10% commercial, you do 15% interior and 5% outside. So, but I don't think we should go below the original 10% for interior space. I think that's a pretty substantial part of what this housing type is that you are providing indoor space for your tenants. And I think otherwise you're just changing a code to say you can have 250 square feet
I mean,
apartments.
I don't agree with some. I mean, I went to a housing conference in LA in October, and there was all kinds of stuff, and everybody would laugh if you knew what the best common space they had in every one of these public housing projects, which were really cool, they were designed by really good architects and you saw them, what would you think the number one communal space was?
It depends a lot on the demographic. I mean,
Yeah.
when you're doing seniors,
Mail-
I do seniors.
Mailroom,
The laundry room.
laundry room.
People were starting, you know what they're doing in California? They found that it was so important because people were down there hanging out waiting for the laundry. They started putting stuff for the kid, like they would build a laundry room around like a play area, around a place where you would get drinks and, not drinks. like
Absolutely. No,
alcohol,
and
drinks,
that's
yeah.
been for 20,
Right.
25, 30
but a lot of
years
people
for
avoided
development.
it, and here it says you can't have it as part of your communal space.
No, they're
You see
saying
what
that
I'm
it doesn't count towards it.
Right,
So
exactly, right.
no, but the idea is that you have to
Mhm.
build communal space to be used. You
Yeah.
can't just count your laundry rooms. So the idea
But
is.
it's being used, you see what I'm saying? It's now they're doing it in California because it's the place.
So
where
we've been
everybody
doing it in
gets to
Florida for forever as well. It's not uncommon. Like normally you'd have your laundry room and you have your community room right next to it, and then you put your playground. And we even position windows so when people are doing laundry, they can watch the kids doing that. That's always been part of it. But if you're putting something in, like if you're not putting washer and dryers in units, and then you've shrunk the units because you don't have to wash and dry it. Now you don't get to count that as accessory space because you put them outside of the units.
You might as well put them inside. So whatever, but it's not here is what I'm saying.
Yeah. That's my thought. I don't think I could support going below 10% for the indoor space on this. If it is just, it's not kind of a tweak change. It is a fundamental change to what micro units are by getting rid of that interior space to me. And I think just making that an exception for existing buildings is kind of weird too. Like if we just feel like, okay, we don't need this anymore and we're going to change it for all micro, but if you're building a new construction versus converting an existing hotel, yeah, I have a concern about that. I know there was a full presentation done with the commission when these units originally came out. And I remember that presentation specifically saying how no, this sort of thing that's happening in other areas where people are just converting into a hotel isn't going to happen here because we have this requirement. So, do you remember those? There was a builder that was proposing micro units that came in from down south. I don't remember if it was Miami or it might have even been just Delray or Pompano, but somebody who was doing micro units and pushed for it up here. And they did a full commission presentation. And at that time, they were proposing not to have the common space. And that's, this is what we got out of that. So, yeah, I'm in favor of the 15% change at the top. I'm not in favor of the exception for existing structures. I think having a reduction, allowing that 10% and not having commercial, perfectly fine with that. But I think going below 10% for interior space is not something I would support.
I agree. I think that makes a lot of sense. I would also point out that the interior shared common areas, we have a really good list and a really good definition of what that is. But subsection G, the outdoor amenities area, there's almost no definition. So I agree with Dan in terms of this exception would basically swallow up the rule. Because they would have that 20% outdoor space, 0% interior shared common areas. And it's like, well, what even is this outdoor space? So I do agree. Yeah.
Anybody else? They have a motion?
So I would make a motion I'm going to make a motion to approve with the change.
Condition.
The change.
recommendation.
I'm making a recommendation. That's right. So I'm making a recommendation to approve, making a recommendation to the commission to approve ordinance 2024-11, subject to the modification that the exemption H still require a minimum of 10% interior space. So effectively, and I would even get rid of the 20%. So I would say you need 10% interior and 5% exterior would be the exception there. So it'd be a net of 15. We're just eliminating the 10 from the original code. We're just eliminating the 10% that was commercial, saying you don't need to have that, but you still need to have your 10% interior space and your 5% exterior space.
Second?
I'll second that.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Thank you very much. Just get mine. Any public comments? No, because there's no public here. Exciting, huh? Even the lights went out back there. Department reports.
Actually, Mr. Chair, I have some planning announcements.
Uh-huh.
We'd like to get some feedback on quorum for our September 4th meeting. I know it's after a holiday weekend and going through a lot of work today and some new stuff coming up. We are at least proposing at least 3 LDR ordinances for the September 4 meeting.
Mhm.
One is going to be our fall 2024 round. Another one is going to be some updates to the floodplain section in chapter 23. And we do have a landscape revision coming that looks like it's going to move forward to that meeting. And that's going to deal with artificial turf. We may have some additional LDR, so we kind of want to get, it's sounded like it's going to be a pretty heavy meeting already. We have the continuance coming up also from the June meeting for Romano Tires conditional use permit. That status so far, as far as the affected party, we haven't received anything, but that item's going to be coming back up.
Mhm.
And looks like we're having some additional October LDR amendments coming your way as well. So if you could provide that information to us on your availability for September 4th as soon as you can, we can, if we think we may not have quorum, we will reschedule that to the 17th, 18th.
17th would be a lot better for me personally. I'm gonna be out of town that week.
Because 17th, okay.
Yeah, the 3rd would be
18th.
better for me too.
So the 18th would be better.
Yes. But I don't know.
Either one of them works for me. I'll be there. I'll be there either of the two. Either.
I'm good for the 18th.
For me, it's better.
So everybody's generally okay with the 18th.
Yes, either one. Either one.
Okay. Okay, that's all I wanted to cover.
Great.
Thanks.
All right, any board member comments? I guess not. We're adjourned. Meeting adjourned.